You don't have to look far to see that a lot of people are upset with the current housing situation in Spain. Whether it's on the news in the form of protests or even comments on my own channel, I can see that there are a lot of people in Spain that are unhappy about the current high and increasing rents in the country. And in this video, I'm going to look at some of the reasons that have led to the situation being what it is today and discuss whether there is a solution to the problem. Let's get right into it. If you're new here, my name is Jonny. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working in Madrid for the past 5 years. On this channel, I talk a lot about personal finance, living in Spain, traveling in Spain, as well as travel and managing your money overseas generally. So some might say that this situation has been going on for a long time in Spain, but from what I've seen, particularly over the past few years, it has gained more and more attention and has become more and more at the forefront of people's concerns living in Spain, and it's become a highly politicized and controversial topic. And on that point, I do want to say that there is no political slant to this video. I'm being as objective as I can and trying to present the facts to you so you can understand what the situation is. Looking at data over the past 2 years in Spain, rental price per square meter across the country has increased on average by about 20%, which is obviously a massive increase in a very short period of time. And the current government does have housing on its agenda. In 2023, they introduced the housing law, or the ley vivienda as it's known in Spanish, which aimed to address some of the affordability concerns and also provide tenant protection in certain cases as well. Earlier this year as well, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez announced that the golden visa option via the real estate investment route is being looked at being taken away. That's yet to go through the courts and be passed officially, but the government has nevertheless announced its intentions publicly. The government also had a proposal to regulate what's known as alquiler temporal in Spanish, which are basically medium-term rental contracts, longer than a month but shorter than a year, which some property owners saw as a possible way to get around some of the legislation in the new ley vivienda. What the government essentially wanted to do was have every medium-term rental contract registered on an online platform with due justification to say why this rental contract basically existed. However, when it was passed through the Spanish parliament, it didn't get the support of one of the minority groups known as Junts per Catalunya, and as a result, it did not pass and become law. So that has not come into effect. And just last weekend, as I make this video, a group in Madrid staged a large protest protesting against the high rents. They even went as far as proposing a renters' strike, essentially not paying the rent because it was too high. And housing affordability continues to be a hot topic on a lot of news programs, a lot of talk programs on Spanish TV as well. So very clear that this has become a hot topic in Spain. Now, in other videos on the channel, I've talked about, the average cost per square meter to buy and to rent properties. So I'm not going to go into that in this video. But if you do watch these videos, and even if you just take like a look at a map on Idealista, which I'll put a link in the video description, you can work out roughly what the average rental prices are in different neighborhoods, cities, provinces, even autonomous communities in Spain. And you can see what the average cost of property is here. And for many people in the big cities, affordability is a challenge. So why is affordability such a challenge? So let's start with an obvious one, inflation, which has obviously been very high across the Eurozone and especially in Spain over the past 2 years. At its peak, interannual inflation reached 10.8% in July 2022. That's saying that if you look at July 2021 prices and compare them to July 2022 prices, you'd see an average increase of 10.8%. And throughout 2022, when inflation was at its highest, the average interannual inflation, looking at different months of the year, was between 6 to 7%, which is not something that a lot of Europeans are used to and is obviously a big increase. And because a lot of rental contracts, even now with like the introduction of the ley vivienda, have a component that incorporates rent increases based on the consumer price index. If rents are increasing at the rate of the consumer price index, then of course a lot of renters will have experienced some significant hikes in their rent looking over that time period and year on year, essentially. Availability of housing in Spain is also a challenge, particularly social housing. So social housing in Spain, probably similar to, in a lot of other European countries, is housing that's made available and the rent that is charged to the tenant is based on their financial means, not on kind of the regular rental market in that sense. But what really stands out in Spain is that the average percentage of the total housing that is social housing, known as vivienda de protección oficial in Spanish, is only 2.5% of the total available housing in Spain, whereas the European average sits around 9.5%. So there's a big gap between Spain and the European average in terms of available social housing in the country. This is again something that the current government has announced that they want to address. They've spoken of 184,000 social houses being built between 2022 and 2025. However, an article from El Economista highlights that only 244 have been built today. Not only the availability of social housing in Spain, but the availability of housing in general in Spain, which could be exacerbating this problem. A report from BBVA talks about a lot of challenges that are contributing to the housing crisis in Spain as well. And it mentions a growing demand for rent, but a stable or declining supply of available houses to rent. In addition, there's limited land that is available and ready to build housing on, which may also be an obstacle in kind of the social housing projects that the government wants to bring forward, which may also be an obstacle in the case of the social housing as well. So using the laws of supply and demand, as demand increases but supply is not keeping up, then one can expect the prices to increase as a result. A report from the organization Provivienda also shows that there's about 21 million houses in Spain in total, but in that total there's around 3.8 million that are empty, so not occupied, no one living there. And at the same time, there's around 2.6 million that are properties that have sporadic use. So that might be a holiday home or a house in the countryside, for example, or at the beach that the owners use during their holidays. Looking at a map from the organization as well, you can find a lot of these properties are situated in the Valencia region around Malaga and also just south of Barcelona. And there's a few in Madrid as well. So actually popular tourist hotspots or holiday destinations for both people inside Spain and people coming abroad to visit Spain. So those empty properties or sporadic use properties could be holiday homes, but at the same time, the empty ones could be houses that are abandoned or are not in a livable state and that need renovation, for example. There's no information given as to why the properties are vacant and whether they're in a livable state or not. So it's difficult to draw solid conclusions from that, though based on where some of the empty housing is, I would say, a lot of these are holiday properties. Also, of the total available housing in Spain, only 16% is rented accommodation. So you got a lot of people who are looking to rent properties, but only 16% of the total property in the country is available for rent. Meanwhile, around 65% is owned, with the owners either having a mortgage or having fully paid off the house. Another point worth discussing is the legislation and whether it favors landlords or tenants. So a lot of landlords and people in the property sector express a lot of concerns around the new Ley Vivienda, which I talked about in depth in that video. But in short, due to the challenges they might face with their return on investment as a result of rent controls and as a result of the legal process to evict non-paying tenants or illegal occupants in a property, then a lot of landlords have increased the price as a result of that to essentially compensate for the risk that may happen to them. Other landlords have taken different approaches to renting out their property, such as holiday rentals or medium-term renting, as I mentioned before. And then there are others who simply think the risk is too great, that something bad will happen if they rent out their property and are just taking their properties off the market and selling them. I think it is important to keep that in mind as well, since landlords in many cases do dictate the prices of rent and therefore how the environment and the legislation can affect some of the decisions they take as a result. This is also mentioned in the BBVA report around the housing situation in Spain. So the factors that we've looked at up to this point are largely related directly to the housing market, but there are two kind of demographic factors that I want to explore as well that I think are relevant and do play a part as well. One is related to the high concentration of populations, especially in major cities like Madrid, like Barcelona, where there's a lot of employment, a lot of people moving for studies, for work, and as a result, there's a lot of people competing for a short supply of accommodation in these densely populated urban areas, which of course pushes the prices up. And as a result, the landlords can essentially have their pick of like the best tenant. They're probably going to look at things like how long someone has been with their company, what their income is, and based on that, they'll select what is the most preferable renter's profile for them to rent out their property to. That of course makes it very challenging for a lot of young people when it comes to their income and employment situation when looking for a place to rent. I had a look at some statistics on the INE, and the average gross income per month for 25 to 34-year-olds in Spain is around 1,800 850 euros, which, assuming 14 pay periods in the year, so 12 monthly pays and 2 extra pays, would work out at around 25,900 euros per year. Factor in income tax, social security, that'll bring you down to about 22,000 euros depending on the autonomous community, and working back again based on 14 pays per year, that would work out at less than 1,500 euros per month. And so trying to work with that in a city like Madrid or Barcelona, where at the low end, and even rooms in shared apartments in some cases can be 700, 800, 900 euros. Looking at the average income already, that's like 50%, possibly even more, that's going just on housing costs. And again, considering the person's income, how much goes in their accommodation and their employment status for young people around that age, it makes it very difficult for people to save money and to be economically solvent in the eyes of the banks that will give mortgages for these people to be able to buy properties. So it's hard out there. All right, so we've talked about a lot of factors that contribute to varying extents towards the problem. Is there a solution? Is there a way to fix the situation? The short answer, from my perspective and the perspective of a lot of others as well, is this is a very complex problem and there is no quick fix. There's no short-term solution to this problem. This is an incredibly complex situation because of how many things are contributing to the situation. Nevertheless, I am going to go through a list of ideas that may help to ease the situation, to improve it slightly or significantly. So first is obviously to increase the supply of housing in Spain. You know, more building projects, more social housing projects, especially increasing the overall supply of properties will make it more available to tenants and perhaps make it more competitive between landlords, which could help to bring some of the rental prices down. The next one is something that the government has actually done, is introduce like incentives to landlords or to tenants, like the bono alquiler for like young people to help them become independent, move out, live on their own, and be able to pay some of the rent. At the same time, the government does have some tax incentives for landlords who rent out their property to others, where that property is the tenant's primary residence. And I think in the context of the ley vivienda as well, there were some tax advantages for landlords who rented out their property to, don't know if it was to like certain tenants or if they did it at a particular price in, you know, like the rent stress area, something like that. But in any case, tax incentives for landlords basically. Also, what started to emerge starting last year, I think is when I started to notice this more, is like first time buyer or help schemes coming from like banks or even regional governments. Like the Madrid regional government has a scheme where they help young people buy their first home and they guarantee like the first 20% of the down payment. There's also banks that are starting to offer, you know, like 95% mortgages for people up to the age of 35 or 40, for example, so that the down payment is less and that the savings required to get on the property ladder is less. So by facilitating access to get on the property ladder and purchase property, then it lowers the stress from the demand in the rental market, essentially. And then obviously when it comes to like young people, obviously like better job stability and like higher incomes would certainly help them. But besides that, like some kind of side hustle, second income stream, like trying to build that in Spain would obviously help them. The challenge here in Spain, of course, is that that's, you know, highly bureaucratic. It involves signing up to social security, like quarterly declarations, all that kind of stuff, if you're making a certain amount of money. Like if there was a system like in the UK or Germany where up to like a certain amount of money for like side hustles or second jobs or whatever, you could have basically like a tax exemption. In the UK, it's like £1,500 net profit, I think, that you can make without having to declare it or pay tax on it. You know, something like this could help young people like save money faster and work quicker towards getting on the property market. In the long term and, you know, in the short term, obviously, like they've got a little bit of breathing room when it comes to paying their rent. Then they're not paying like such a higher percentage of their total income is going to rent, because they've now got like a second source of income coming in as well. I'm also a big fan of like not living in city centers as well, like living in the suburbs. Even in Madrid where it's expensive, like there is a notable difference between renting in like Madrid capital and like, I don't know, somewhere like Getafe or Leganés, Alcobendas, like somewhere on the outside of the city. It obviously comes with a bit of a social cost, maybe in the fact that, you know, you're not in the heart of the action of the city. Maybe comes with a time cost as well, like you might spend more time commuting if you're working in Madrid or if you're traveling into Madrid for activities and stuff. But if saving money and like housing affordability is a priority, like the savings benefit that comes as a result of living on the outside of the city rather than in the center is pretty significant and worthwhile in my opinion. So guys, I hope you found this video interesting and informative. Leave a comment and let me know what you think about the situation and what you think is the solution to fix this problem. And if you're interested in watching some of the other videos that I've mentioned throughout this video, such as the details of the ley vivienda or the buying versus renting debate in Spain, then you can also check those out as well. So next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.